Look at her, walking proud in that old rag.
She clearly doesn't belong here with the rest of us.
She thinks she belongs here.
They laughed at her. Not a small laugh, not a mistake laugh. A full, open-mouthed, point your finger, call your friends kind of laugh. Right there, in the middle of the New Yam Festival, under the bright sun, in front of her children, because of her wrapper. But here's the part nobody in Abatete understood that day. The woman they mocked was already richer than most of the men standing there. And exactly 1 year later, the same village that laughed would stand up when she arrived. Before we start this story, let me ask you something. Have you ever been laughed at because of what you were wearing? Because of what you didn't have? Because you didn't look successful? If yes, type "I will build in silence" in the comments. Because today's story is not just about a rapper. It's about power. It's about patience. It's about the kind of woman who doesn't argue when they mock her. She goes home, closes the door, and builds something so big they can't laugh anymore. This is the story of the day they laughed at Nneka's rapper and the day they realized they had laughed at the wrong woman. Let's begin. The day they laughed at Nneka's rapper. She was standing in the middle of the New Yam Festival with her chin up and her heart quietly breaking. She had worn it because it was the best she had. That was the whole truth of it. It was the best she had. It had been washed so many times the pattern had softened into something between its original colors and the color of the sky just before rain. Faded but not ugly. Worn but not dirty. She had ironed it the night before with a coal iron she borrowed from the woman next door, pressing every fold until the cloth lay flat and decent against her body. She had dressed her children first, always her children first. Her son in his one good shirt, her daughter with her hair oiled and plaited tight. They looked neat and presentable, and she had felt, standing in her doorway that morning looking at them, a private satisfaction that required no audience. Then she had put on her wrapper and walked to the festival. The laughter came from the cluster of women near the palm wine stand, the ones who always stood together, who always wore the newest Ankara, whose husbands had paid for Ashwebi that cost more than Nneka earned in 2 months. She heard it before she understood what it was for. Then she saw where their eyes were pointing. At her wrapper. "Look at this one," said the loudest among them, a woman named Obiageli, whose voice carried the specific confidence of someone who has never once had to count what she spent. She came to the New Yam Festival in a burial wrapper. Somebody help her. The laughter that followed was the worst kind, the kind that pretends it is not cruelty, that wears the costume of amusement so that if you react, you are the problem. Nneka stood in it. She did not move. She did not look away. She held Obiageli's eyes for a moment, long enough to see that the woman knew exactly what she was doing. And then she turned and walked to where the food was being served, and she sat with her children and she ate. Her son looked at her. "Mama," he whispered, "are you okay?" "I am always okay," she said. "Eat your food." But that night, after her children slept, she sat outside her house in the dark, and she allowed herself to feel it. Not the laughter. She had lived long enough to know that the laughter of small people is not a verdict. What she felt was older and deeper than that. The weight of years of making something from almost nothing. The specific loneliness of trying hard in a place where no one is watching. The quiet rage of a woman who knows her worth and lives in a world that keeps pricing her wrong. She sat with it until the anger became something else, until it became fuel. What the women at the palm wine stand did not know about Nneka, what almost nobody in Abatete knew, was what she had been doing for the past 9 years in the back room of her small house while her children slept. She had started with a single bag of dried ogidi her mother left her when she died. She had ground it, packaged it in leaves the way the old women taught, and sold it at the small market 2 villages over where nobody knew her face well enough to have opinions about her wrapper. She reinvested every kobo. She bought more raw ingredients. She learned which markets had gaps. She learned which towns had traders who needed a reliable supplier. She kept her books in a brown notebook with a cracked cover, every transaction recorded in her small, precise handwriting. She did not tell anyone, not because she was secretive by nature, but because she had watched enough women in this village announce small beginnings only to have them crushed by the weight of other people's doubt before they became large ones. She had learned to build in silence. By the time Obiageli laughed at her wrapper at the New Yam Festival, Nneka had accounts in 2 banks. She had suppliers in 3 states. She had quietly, methodically, over 9 invisible years, built a trading business that turned over more in a month than most of the men at that festival earned in a year. She had not bought new clothes because new clothes were not the priority. Her children's school fees were the priority. Her reinvestment was the priority. The business was the priority. She had decided early and deliberately that she would not spend on appearance until the foundation was unshakable. The day after the festival, she decided the foundation was unshakable. She went to the city. She came back 3 days later in a car that was not borrowed. She was dressed in the kind of fabric that makes people stop speaking mid-sentence. Deep, rich, the color of a forest at night, embroidered at the collar and wrists with gold thread, so fine it caught the light when she moved. Her children sat in the back seat. Her son wore new shoes that fit. Her daughter had a school bag that had never belonged to anyone else. The village noticed. They always noticed the arrival. They had not noticed the years of work that made the arrival possible, but they noticed the arrival. What happened next took 12 months. She bought the abandoned compound at the center of the village that had been sitting in a land dispute for 20 years. She resolved the dispute, which required money and patience, and neither sentiment nor speed. She converted it into a processing center and employed 31 women, including 4 whose husbands had lost their farms that season. She built a borehole. The village had been fetching water from a stream 40-minute walk for generations. The borehole took 6 weeks to drill and 1 ceremony to commission. She wore simple clothes to the ceremony, not because she could not afford otherwise, because she wanted to. She paid 6 school fees anonymously through the village head, children whose parents could not manage. She did not announce it. The village head knew, the parents knew, Nneka knew. That was enough. And then, on the first anniversary of the festival, she attended the New Yam celebration again. She wore the faded wrapper, not because it was the best she had this time. She wore it because it was the truth of where she had come from, and she had decided that the truth of where she had come from was not something to hide or apologize for. It was something to carry with her head up into every room she entered for the rest of her life. Obiageli was there. She saw Nneka arrive. She saw the car. She saw the way the village head greeted her. She saw the women who now worked at Nneka's processing center stand a little straighter when she walked past. She did not laugh. Nneka did not look at her. There was no score to settle. That was the thing nobody had expected. That a woman who had been publicly humiliated would return not with revenge, but with something far more devastating to the people who had laughed. She had returned with proof. "Why are you wearing that old wrapper?" Nneka's daughter whispered beside her, tugging her hand. Nneka looked down at her daughter, then out at the festival, then at the village that was, in more ways than one, now hers. "Because," she said quietly, "I want to remember what they saw when they looked at me and what they missed." The old people of Abatete will tell you that the most dangerous woman in any village is not the one who fights back when they laugh at her. It is the one who goes home, closes the door, and goes back to work. Because she is building something, and she will not stop until it is finished. The end.